G'day and welcome back to part 3 of my Aristocrat around 1935 radio restore. I've called it a model 502. That's about the closest model I can get to it. That's not what it is. In parts 1 and 2 we discovered how big the radio was. I did get it to work.
So let's turn our attention.
In the last episode I dismantled it, repainted the chassis and got it all working again and made up a new voltage divider resistor. I still have to make a dial glass, but I'm going to have a look at the speaker this week. Here's the speaker that came with it, and if you saw part 2 I did plug it in, but it just made a very thin sound. It wasn't from the diaphragm, it was actually from the audio transformer on the side here. As you can see, the cone has been repaired with a big patch of cardboard here. The cone is intact, otherwise it's actually pretty good apart from that giant patch on there. I may have to use it again. I do have another cone, but this is an unusual size. The cone I have doesn't quite fit. Here's the replacement cone I've got, and it's a bit small. This is actually 8.5 inches across. The cone's for an 8-inch speaker, so it's just short of 8-inch. It probably could be made to fit. So because of that, I'm going to try and save this cone first. I'll see how we go. If I can't do it, well, I'll have to try and make the other one fit. Before I plugged it into the radio last time, I did check the field coil and I checked the primary on the audio transformer, and they're both okay. The problem I think is in the secondary side of it, and the voice coil attaches here and here. You can't buzz that out because it's got the humbucker in there, so it just reads the humbucker. So I'll try and unsolder one side of the voice coil. Actually, I'll just take both off, I think, and we'll buzz that out. I think I'll find the voice coil is no good. That didn't go well. The wire on this side just came straight off the speaker cone. I'll attempt to remove the cone in one piece. There's a nut and screw that hold that centerpiece in, so I'll try and undo the nut. Oh no. This is not going well. Maybe I should have undone the screw. Alright, I'll try and take the cone out. Of course it's glued around the edge there. A bit of this stuff here, it's felt, has started to come off. So that's a starting point. Now I've just got some acetone here. I tried this on the last speaker I did. Let's see if it'll melt the adhesive. Now it is melting. It's making a bit of damage there. Alright, I'll keep going. I soaked all that with the acetone and it has lifted all the way around, so I should be able to lift it out. There we go. The 90-year-old voice coil is still there. It looks intact actually. The wire disconnected from here where it's attached to the voice coil wire, so that could be reattached. I'll see how it would go if I tried to fit this. It could be done, I reckon. I'd have to extend this land around here so that it had a bit more purchase on the basket edge there. But it could be done. I've been looking at this for about an hour. I have the old speaker there, the original speaker, the field coil and the output transformer are plugged into the radio, so they're all working. The cone's missing, but I'm using this car speaker as a temporary replacement cone, if you like. So the sound's coming out of there. I've got the radio on. So the sound's coming out of there. So all this works, the field coil and the output transformer are all working. So the options are, I want to keep this if I can. I could replace it with a permanent magnet speaker and just keep the field coil somewhere, mounted somewhere. But I don't want to do that. I could put maybe get another speaker to fit inside there. It'd be a bit tight. Might have to take the center magnet out or something and make it look like it's there, but it would have another speaker inside it. The other option is to make a new voice coil and use that replacement cone. The other option I have is to refit this one. This one seems to be okay. I've measured it and it's about 1.3 I think ohms on the voice coil, and that's DC, so if you convert it to impedance, you multiply by about 1.4 and it comes up to about 2 ohms. So it's about a 2 ohm speaker, and I think that was pretty standard for that sort of period. I've managed to find the wire here. This is the broken lead here that came off when I was desoldering it. So I've put on a little clip lead here, and I've got a little plan. My plan is to refit this cone and see if it would work. If I put the little screw back in, and that should hold it centered. You know, I'll have to manually center it, but it'll come up somewhere close. It's not bad at all, actually. That's the little flexible lead from the cone that usually goes to the transformer. I'll connect it with a clip lead, and this is the yellow one. I'll connect that up. This is the one I soldered onto the cone. Let's see if that works. The radio's warmed up again.
Down while council works on replacing the topsoil and bringing the grass back to life. In the deluge brought by the tropical low, parks all around the city were inundated, but there is one park in Brisbane's inner west which...
So that's working. Really, if I could re-establish that lead back onto the cone, I just glue all that back together. I might have a go at doing the voice coil, because I got up at about 5 o'clock and machined up this, I don't know what you call it, mandrel, to form the voice coil on. So I might as well have a go at it, and if it doesn't work, well, I'll throw it in the bin. Alright, let me set everything up and we'll come back and see if I can make a voice coil. I've been doing a lot of experimenting with different wires to try and get the correct resistance over the same length of coil. And I've come up with this one, and this is the correct length or width, I suppose, of the winding. It's only got one layer on at the moment. It needs another one to go backwards, but I'm just trying it out. There was no use doing it properly and then having it not fit. And it kind of fits. It's in the cone there, but it rubs on the center pole there. Yeah, it's just a bit tight, I think. Hopefully you can see this. This edge here is closer than that edge up there. So this pole piece is not centered in the outer collar here. So I think I'll pull it apart, and then I can measure this core, and I think it's got a bit of rust around it. But at least then I'll know exactly what size that is. So I'll pull it apart and clean all this up, and then I'll show you how I made the voice coil. I've pulled the speaker apart. There was a little bit of rust come down here, but it's not too bad. It'll clean up okay. And when it was all assembled, I tried to measure that, and it looked like it was 1 inch, and that's pretty much a standard. It is exactly 1 inch, so that's okay. This hole here is 1.1 inches, so it's 100 thou bigger than that. I have my mandrel ready here. This is X-ray film, and I cut a strip of it off and rolled it up, put an elastic band around it, and soaked it in boiling water for, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. So it's kind of kept the shape a bit. I can put that on here. I'll hang it over a bit so that I can grab it to release any adhesives that get onto it. And I'm going to use two. The last one I did, the test one, when I only used one sheet and it was just a bit too tight. Now I'll put that on there, and if I hold it down, I should be able to roll this O-ring on it. Now, I watched a number of videos on people doing this. I didn't get any that I thought were fantastic, so I've sort of made my own method up. Alright, so that should be nice and tight on there. It shouldn't move. Alright, that's good. Nice little gap in there. So I can load it onto the arbor here. Put a couple of spacers on, and then lock it on with this big nut. To work out the gauge of the wire that they used, I measured it. I couldn't measure the individual wires, and it comes out at 5.5 roughly. I put it under my electronic microscope, and I could see it had 17 turns. So 5.5 divided by 17 equals 0.32. So that wire is 0.32 millimeters diameter. Now, of course, that's actually measuring with the insulation on. So this measures at 0.3, so it's 0.02 millimeters thinner. So I'm not going to put 17 wraps on it, I'm going to put 19 on it. If it's too much, I can just peel some off at the end. I've set the machine up, and it's going to do 3 steps. The voice coil has 2 layers, so the first layer is going to go from here to over here. There's 19 turns on that. Then the second layer has to sit on top of the first layer. So it's going to do one turn and let me position the wire on top of the first layer, and then it'll do 18, and we should end up with 2 wires coming out this end. I'll poke the wire under here, and I'll put a bit of tape on it, and I'll put a bit of tape here, just make sure that former doesn't slip on the mandrel. Alright, let's do it. I will actually wind it on a little bit just to get it in a line, which is going to affect my turns, but that's okay. Alright, so we're on step 1. I'll push start, I'll see what happens. What I found when I was doing the test windings was it's very difficult to get this wire to jump up on top of the first layer. So I'm going to put a dab of super glue there, and that'll hold it, and then I can line it up. Alright, I'll let that set and I'll come back. I'm just pushing the windings in, make sure they're all tight. They look pretty good. I'm going to put super glue on the rest of it. The super glue's dried. The next step is going to do one turn, and to just make sure that it's sitting up on top of the first layer. So I'll hit it. Right, and I'll just check it. I've lowered the number of turns to 17 to allow for the fact that I've wound a couple on already. So if I push start, we should wind on. There it is. That doesn't look too bad. Once again, I'll put a blob of super glue where that end is there, and that way I can take the tension off the wire. I think that's dried, so I'll just wind a bit on and snip it off. I'll apply a layer of super glue on there as well and come back when it's dry. The glue is dried. I need to cut the former off just below the end of the coil here, so I should be able to run the machine here. I'll take this off and see what it looks like. Alright, I'll cut that off alright. I'll try and grab the inner bit of the film there, the X-ray film. Whoa, it won't come out. I tried to slide that off the mandrel, but it is tight, so I went outside, actually pushed it off. Yeah, okay. So I had to drill a hole in a block of wood and use the drill press to get it to move. Anyway, there we are. I've got the speaker here, and on here this is too big, and in the hole it's too big as well. Of course, it doesn't actually go in all that well. What I think I'll do, I'll quickly make another one. I'll only put one of these in. Maybe I can find something really thin just to make it a slightly bigger, but not as big as having the 2 films in. And I'll try again. I did that first one just using 1 film and it was too tight. So, you know, it's somewhere between the 2, obviously. If all that fails, I'll just go and put the old cone back in. I've left it intact so that I can do that. But anyway, this one looks apart, but yeah, it's just too big. I'm going to see what resistance we've got. I'll just clean off a bit of the insulation. And I'm not really worried what we get. If it comes out at about 1.4, that's fine. When I measured it, I also had a clip lead in the circuit, so that probably added a bit of resistance as well. So as long as it's 1 point something, actually it'll probably be a bit higher than that because we've got long leads on here. Let's have a look. It's 1.37. So that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Well, let's move on to the next bit. I've cleaned the speaker up and I'm reassembling it. I've got these bolts in. I'll just leave them loose. I need to center this centerpiece here, and I'll get it roughly in position. And I've made a little sleeve up here, and it's a good tight tolerance. I'm happy with that. That looks nice and loose there. So I'll tighten the nuts up. That hasn't moved. Alright, I'll finish torquing all those up. Alright, they're tight, and that's still loose. Good. And the gap looks good. Okay. I ended up making 3 voice coils. This one here had 2 pieces of this film in it, or 2 layers. This one only had 1 layer, and this one had 1 layer and about a 1/9 thick piece of paper as well as the film. This one's too big, this one's too small, this one's just right. So I'll call this one Goldilocks. That's the one I'm going to fit. I'll insert that X-ray film first. I'm going to pick up the gap here if I can. Right, and then it's just a matter of pushing the voice coil down. Make sure I push that film right down. It is. I use my little spacer to push the voice coil down, and the coils here need to be just above the plate there. The winding is just slightly thicker than the plate, so it'll be sticking out the same amount on the other side. I'll just check the cone, and that's just sitting down nicely, so it's not being pushed or pulled. So that's how it should be glued. I'll run a bead of adhesive down here. I'll have to let that dry for a few hours. I'll go and design and cut out a center support that they used in these old speakers. I have another speaker with that support in it, so I've taken a photo of it. I've transferred it into a paint program and cut it all out. Then I've transferred it into an SVG conversion program and converted it to SVG. And then I've imported it into Lightburn, and here it is here. I've made this one 45mm diameter, but I can make it any diameter I like, just resize it. I haven't added a hole in the center, but I can do that now, and then I can keep it at 5mm regardless of what the outside diameter is. Here they are being cut on the laser cutter, and I think they're going to be okay. Because this cone's a bit undersized, it's only just overlapping the edge here. I'll print out a little cardboard spacer here, and then I'll glue the cardboard spacer to this cone and then around to the basket. So I'll quickly design it in Lightburn here, which is the laser cutting program, and send it out to the laser cutter. And here it is, and hopefully that will fit. And that looks good. Alright, so I'll glue that in eventually when the time comes. The glue's been setting for a few hours, so I'll try and take it out. I've taken that bit of X-ray film out. Might be alright. I can find a spot there where it's not rubbing, so might be alright. The next step will be to put the little centering ring in. I'll cut this excess bit of cardboard off the voice coil. I've trimmed that voice coil off, but next time I'm going to pre-cut it. It was too hard to do it like that, and it's come out a little jagged on the edges. I've put a bit of super glue there just to seal up the edges again. This is the spider I printed, and it has a bolt that goes in the center, and it's glued to the cone around the edges. So that stops the cone from being able to move sideways and keeps it centered. It's come out nice. I'm pretty happy with it, but before I can fit it, I'm going to treat it. It's just a bit of thick paper at the moment, so I'll take it out and give it some treatment. The spider needs to have a shape. The edges need to be bent up so that they align with the angle of the cone. I've printed up a little mold here, 2-part mold, and it'll go in the middle there and just bend the edges over so that it fits in the cone. I've thinned out some adhesive with some water here, and I'll just soak it in that, and that should, when it dries out, should stiffen it up. This is thoroughly soaked. I'll get the excess off. And I'll lay it there, and there's a little hole in the center there to center it all. And I just put the two halves together. And it actually clips together like Lego. It wasn't my intention, but that's how it's turned out. I'll let that dry off for half an hour, then I'll do the other one, which is going to be a spare. Here's the spider finished. I took it outside and gave it a coat of paint to stiffen it up a bit more and make it look original, or something like original. Now I need to glue that in, and I'll do that now. I'll put a bead of glue around the edge here, and I'll put it in here. I'll just use the bolt as a guide. I'll try and center it in the bolt hole. Doesn't matter too much. That looks good. I'll push it down on the cone and let that set. The adhesive's dried on the spider, and as I said earlier, there's a bolt that goes through here and attaches to the magnet, and that centers the coil in the magnet. Because this is the wrong cone, it's too far away. There's a gap in there, and it's about a 7mm gap between the spider and the top of the magnet. So I've machined up a little aluminium spacer, and I'll glue that on there, and I'll put that back, and it's just sitting on there nicely. It's not pressuring, it's just the right height. I've got a bit of 5-minute epoxy there. I'll just glue that on there, and it's just so it doesn't fall off once the cone's in there, because you wouldn't be able to get it back on. The last speaker I reconed, I used these little hollow rivets to anchor the voice coil wires to the flexible wires that go to the transformer, and I just put 2 of those in there, bent them over, and then I was able to solder to them. So I'll do the same again. I'll just put a little mark there and one about there somewhere. I'll use the soldering iron. It worked last time, so I'll do that. Made a nice neat little hole. And the rivets just go in from the front there. I'll take it out to the workshop, pin them over, and then I can attach the wires to it. I've pinned over the 2 rivets, and I've glued the voice coil wires down with some adhesive so they won't vibrate. And I'll poke the fly lead up that's going off to the transformer and wrap the wire around there. I'll add a bit of flux to it as well, and a bit of solder. And there it is. I'll trim it off, and I'll put a bit of adhesive over there as well to hold it all together. I'm going to try this out in the basket. I did put some adhesive on top of those solder points where I put the 2 fly leads. I used a new adhesive, and it's so runny it just ran everywhere, so that's a real mess. I'm pretty disappointed with that. I need to put spacers in there to center the voice coil on the magnet. I've cut up 3 thin strips of that X-ray film, and I can get it in there with the little centering cardboard thing there. Get another one there, and hopefully I can get the 3rd one in. There it goes. They're all bottomed out. I've got the retaining screw in the middle there. This retaining screw's got a nut on it, but what I found out later was the nut's been drilled out. There's no thread in it, so it's just being used as a big washer to give a bit of surface area. They seem to have very similar tension, so I'll take them out and I'll try and see if it's rubbing. That sounds good. There is no rubbing there. I'll just lightly solder these wires in so I can test the speaker. I realised later that I had wound the voice coil in the opposite direction to the original, so I'll swap the wires over behind here so the speaker works in the correct phase. I've got the radio here. I plugged the speaker into it, so we'll see what happens. I see no reason why it won't work. It's not rubbing, so it should work. I can't hear it. Let's turn down.
Identities that are not their real identities.
Works.
And maybe this is contributing to some of the problems, some of the serious problems that people have when using these apps. By the same token, some apps actually require you to use a fake name. And I was reading an
That's working very well. I'm a bit relieved, I guess. I didn't think it wouldn't work, but you know, nevertheless, it is working. I only have clothes pegs holding on the outer cone, but it didn't seem to vibrate, so yeah, really happy.
exists in those tiny pockets, those tiny towns like Junda, Adavale, Quilpie, Eromanga, Thargomindah, Yulo. They're all very small, and they all...
I can't hear any rubbing at all. There's no vibration. All I need to do now is glue all this outer cone back on, and that speaker will be done. The cone's not overhanging by a lot, maybe 1.5 mil, 1/16 of an inch or so, but I will put a bead of glue around there, and then I'll put that spacer that I made, and that'll bind the whole thing together. Okay, that's all the way around. I'll just make sure it's centered and it's not sort of pulling on one way or another. I think that's okay. I've got to glue that ring on that I cut out on my laser cutter. So I'll just put glue all over here. That has a good layer of adhesive on it, so that'll fill up any gaps that are here. And I'll just put the little ring that I cut, and I've soaked this ring with acrylic, clear acrylic. So it should be pretty waterproof or moisture resistant at least. With that much adhesive on there, it's going to take a day or so to dry off. So I'll just let it sit here. I do have to make some little felt gaskets. I could use the old one, but I'm still hanging on to the old cone in case this is a failure of some sort. So I'll cut some new ones out of my laser cutter and we'll put those on when this dries. I laser cut some felts out, so they're just going to go in there. They're self-adhesive, so I can just peel the back off and stick them down. They look good. Alright, well that's the 4 of them done. I think the speaker's finished. The radio's powered, the speaker's connected. We'll just make sure it still works.
A lot of what the Treasury and Energy Minister announced today is a very centrally planned system, and that's fine. That's what Queensland Government has always been around the energy system.
Now I haven't got an aerial anymore. My mini whip area got damaged in the cyclone, so I'm just using a bit of long wire outside, which doesn't work very well. Yeah. Anyway, it's working.
Project copper string was serious.
Those are the only 2 stations I can pick up with the long wire. I'm really happy with the speaker, and I'm glad I did it. I was nearly going to put the old cone back, but I'm glad I did it. I've learned how to make a voice coil, and this centering fixture here, I learned how to do that, or I worked out a way of doing it. And as I said earlier, for years I was wondering how that was going to be reproduced, so it's worked out pretty well and it does its job. Next time we'll make a dial for it, and it needs to be aligned once the dial's on, and of course there's some cabinet work to do. So I hope you enjoyed following along this week, and I hope you can join me next time for my next radio adventure.